Hello, you are watching Shalom World News. I'm David Kerr from Lansing in Michigan, and these are your latest news headlines from around the world. 18 people have been killed and more than 100 others injured after rockets hit a market in Sudan's capital Khartoum on Wednesday. That's according to local reports. The civilian deaths came on the same day as truce talks between the rival military groups fighting for control of Sudan collapsed. Both the leadership of the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces had agreed to extend a humanitarian ceasefire for another 5 days. That agreement only lasted 24 hours, though, after the army alleged that the Rapid Support Group were not committed to the terms. The peace talks are being brokered by both the United States and Saudi Arabia. The fighting in Sudan has been ongoing since April. In war-torn Ukraine, 3 people were killed on Wednesday night in a fresh round of Russian missile strikes on the capital city of Kiev. Among the dead was an 11-year-old girl and her mother. The missile attack upon the capital is the 4th this week. That makes for a total of 17 strikes upon Kiev in May. Most of the attacks took place at night, although at least one occurred during the day. Meanwhile, the Catholic charity Cáritas Spain has given out grants worth €214,000 or $230,000 to combat human trafficking in Ukraine. The aid agency say that more than 100,000 Ukrainian young people are victims of sexual or labour exploitation. According to Cáritas Spain, most of the documented cases of sexual violence committed by Russian troops in Ukraine have taken place in the eastern occupied areas of the country over the past year. The White House says that the persecution of the Catholic Church by Nicaragua's left-wing dictatorship is unacceptable. Responding to questions from the media on Wednesday, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said that there had been a dramatic deterioration of respect for democratic principles and human rights in Nicaragua, including the harassment and imprisonment of leaders from opposition groups and the Catholic Church. Mr. Kirby said all these actions are unacceptable, adding that several measures are being taken by the US to hold the regime of President Daniel Ortega to account, including the imposition of new sanctions. It's claimed that executions in the Islamic Republic of Iran are at an 8-year high, with 142 people executed in May alone. That's according to the human rights group Iran Human Rights. Their director, Mahmoud Moghadam, says the purpose of the increased number of executions is to sow fear amongst the population to prevent protests against the government. They also say that most of the executions this year have been on drug-related charges. In total, 307 people have been executed this year up until June the 1st. That's a 76% increase on last year. Iran Human Rights are now calling upon the international community to pressure the Iranian regime to reverse this trend. Floods in Somalia have forced over 400,000 people to flee their homes, and that's according to a new report by the United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF. They say that heavy rains in Somalia and the Ethiopian highlands are now expected to cause flash floods that could have a negative impact upon up to 1.6 million people. In the town of Belatwene in Somalia's Hiran region, UNICEF say that the recent floods have displaced almost 90% of the residents. Families who've been uprooted by the floods, they say, have limited access to basic necessities like food, water and shelter. Pope Francis is urging entrepreneurs to work together for the common good, addressing attendees to the Business Council of Latin America's annual assembly who were visiting the Vatican. The Holy Father urged entrepreneurs to exchange ideas and to join forces in dealing with problems currently facing humanity. The Pope advocated a culture of encounter, which he says can push aside any shadows that creep into the workplace, including an excessive drive for profit that seeks to enslave workers. More than 600,000 young people have already registered for this year's World Youth Day, so say the event organisers. The gathering in the Portuguese capital of Lisbon in August will see young Catholics from around the world come together with Pope Francis. Among the countries sending the largest number of pilgrims, say organisers, are Spain, Italy, Portugal, France, Poland and the USA. More than 20,000 volunteers have also registered, and thousands of families have also offered to welcome young pilgrims in the host diocese across Portugal. World Youth Day was first initiated by Pope St. John Paul II back in 1985. Republican senators on Capitol Hill are calling for new sanctions to be placed upon Afghan's Taliban regime in response to human rights abuses. On Wednesday, Senator Jim Risch of Idaho, backed by 18 other Republican senators, outlined the details of their Taliban Sanctions Act. It calls upon the US president to impose sanctions on the Taliban for their involvement in terrorism, drug trafficking, and the violation of women's rights. All transactions involving Taliban-owned property would also be blocked and outlawed, and any visas or other entry-permitting documents would be rendered invalid. Senator Risch said that without a significant American presence in Afghanistan, the Taliban's power is growing. At least 1,872 people have been killed in Nigeria in the first quarter of 2023, so says a new report released by the Christian non-governmental organisation the Stephanos Foundation. They calculated that 217 attacks were reported in 34 Nigerian states, resulting in 714 abductions and 65 people injured. The organisation is now calling for urgent action to address the underlying causes of the violence. Meanwhile, the Diocese of Ondo in Nigeria has unveiled a week-long programme to honour and pray for the victims of last year's Pentecost Sunday attack, which saw armed men attack St Francis Xavier Church in Owo, killing at least 50 people, including children. The commemorations will take place from June the 5th to June the 10th. Hundreds of people have attended the consecration of Australia's newest Syro-Malabar bishop, 57-year-old Mar John Panamthotathil, who was born in India, was installed as the head of the St Thomas the Apostle Syro-Malabar Catholic Eparchy of Melbourne on Wednesday. The eparch, which is the equivalent of a diocese, has jurisdiction over all Syro-Malabar Catholics in Australia. The Syro-Malabar Church is an ancient Eastern church that has its roots in India and is in full communion with the Bishop of Rome. During the ceremony in Melbourne, Cardinal George Allen Cherry, who is the major Archbishop of the Syro-Malabar Church, noted the coincidence that the birthday of the new bishop coincided with his day of consecration. The homily was preached by Archbishop Mark Coleridge of Brisbane. Several bishops from India, Europe and the United States attended the ceremony, along with 20 bishops from across the United States. Finally, a new biopic featuring the life of the 20th century Italian Capuchin monk Padre Pio will hit cinema screens across the United States on June the 2nd. The film's directed by Abel Ferrara and stars the actor Shia LaBeouf as the miracle-working friar who died in 1968 and was canonised in 2002. The influence of the saint's life is such that LaBeouf converted to Catholicism during the making of the film. The 36-year-old is now preparing to receive the sacrament of confirmation, which he says he hopes to receive from Bishop Robert Barron of Winona, Rochester. Well, that's all your news for now. Do join us for more tomorrow. You can also join us at swnews.org for news updates. Shalom.